So welcome everyone who is listening at some point. We're coming in over your radio or through YouTube. My name is Courtney Doggart. I'm the president of Network 2020, which is a nonprofit based in New York. And we really try to have a lot of conversations that illuminate some of the intricacies of international affairs. Today, we are here with Tara Kangarlou, who is a global affairs journalist, author of The Heartbeat of Iran, and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. She is here with us today to talk about Iran and what has been happening in the Middle East. And there's obviously been a lot on the play-by-play over what's happened in the last nearly 2 weeks, starting with Israel's preventive attack on Iran that drew the two countries into open conflict, trading missiles back and forth. And then the United States joined with strikes on nuclear sites as well. Fortunately, we are now in a place where there is a ceasefire that is fragile. But I wanted today in this conversation with Tara to step back a bit and look at Iran and look and talk about the people of Iran, because that often gets overlooked, I think, when we're having conversations about what's happening with the government. And so I have a few questions, Tara, that I'd love to ask for you, and we can take this in any direction that feels right. But where I wanted to start with is we're now in the place of a fragile ceasefire. Hopefully it will hold. But during the last nearly 2 weeks, ordinary people in the region, your friends and family, you're from Iran originally, have been pulled into this open conflict. So could you just talk to us about the range of Iranians that you have been in touch with and what the mood has been for them?
Thanks so much, Courtney, for the conversation. And of course, Network 2020, you guys have always been really leading discussions on the nuances and the depth and really the realities on the ground, wherever that is. So I very much appreciate this discussion. Where do I even begin? Listen, Courtney, the last 12 days of war it has cost a huge toll on people's lives, people's livelihoods, on both sides, I will say. Listen, both Iran and Israel, civilians in both countries have been affected. And I don't think there is a single person in that region who would say bombs and strikes are the answer to peace, security, and stability. And I think this is just the categorical truth. As you mentioned, I was born and raised in Iran. Half of my life, and the second half, as a professional American journalist, I covered the region. Again, Iran is a country of 90 million people, and the majority of them categorically are not happy with the government. But just to put things in perspective, 12 years of war cost more than 500 lives. The Israeli strikes killed 500 people. 90% of them are civilians, ordinary citizens. Just to give our listeners perspective, one story that really stuck was, all of them, but there was a family of four, and they were living in Saudat Abad, which is a very, residential, quiet neighborhood that also has shops and coffee shops and restaurants and also businesses. Right, it's in the west of Tehran, and this apartment was hit, and both parents were killed, and so was the youngest victim of this war. It was a 2-month-old baby, Rayane Qasemian, and she died in the hospital after enduring 80% burn. And so did her parents, and her mom was a leading gynecologist in Tehran. And the only surviving member of the family was a 5-year-old boy, the sort of older brother of Ryan, who died just 2 days ago in the hospital. So that's just to encapsulate that ordinary people, wherever that may be, bear the brunt of these conflicts. Again, my own friends were affected, people that I've been in touch with for years, sources. As you know, my book, The Heartbeat of Iran, encapsulates real lives of ordinary Iranians in Iran. So speaking with people from, again, all walks of life, whether they're, the more affluent members of the society or just ordinary people trying to make ends meet, the more conservative or, the more liberal factions. Nobody in Iran wanted this war. Nobody in Iran wants a war. And nobody is happy, whether it be with their own government or that of the United States and Israel. And I know we're going to get into this, but to set the mood, it is just exhausting for people. It's distressing, but they feel helpless. They want to have hope, but it's very difficult to hold on to hope when you feel abandoned.
And just to pick up on that last point about feeling abandoned, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because
Yes.
for Iranians, it didn't just start 12 days ago. They've been, I think, caught in the middle of their government and other governments for quite some time. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit, where that abandonment comes in?
Thank you. If you talk to, again, majority of Iranians would say, we're caught between the lunacy of our regime and the aggression of Israel. I mean, they're looking at what Israel is doing in Gaza, what it has been, doing historically, and they are very well aware that, listen, Israel does not have our best interests at heart. They're not there to liberate us or help us. They are there because of their own agenda. And at the same time, they are well aware that the regime has spent trillions of dollars, and Courtney, it is literally trillions of dollars in the span of 30 plus years to build this nuclear program. To do what? To bring what? The average person in Iran is suffering, again, financially like no other time before. Inflation is at its highest. 50% of the population in Iran lives under the poverty line. And mind you, that this is an extremely educated society. You have doctors right now, driving taxis just because they can't afford to feed their families. The same with lawyers, engineers. So you have a population, the majority of them, who are extremely educated, who are extremely sophisticated, but economically they're being held back by the policies and behaviors of the regime. And on top of that, the impact of sanctions. They've been choked. Imagine a large, vibrant country, right? So capable, but choked and isolated, right? So they are just stuck, and they truly feel abandoned. And this is a conversation that came up over and over in discussions with, again, all walks of life. Folks that I've spoken with the last 12 days, they're like, listen, we came on the street back in 2009 to show the world that we are angry at our government, that we don't want this system, we want reform. Back then, reform. And we were choked and stifled. We were brutally cracked down. And at the time, President Obama just watched. I remember actually, my dad was still alive, and I was back and forth in Iran, and I remember Obama. I was like Obama, meaning he is with us. People in Iran looked at him to see if he's going to support this organic grassroots led movement rather, and they felt abandoned. Thousands were arrested, so many killed, right? And people still remember this. Then fast forward, you had the 2019 uprisings, and then you had the 2022 Women Life Freedom movement uprisings. Again, hundreds were killed, thousands were arrested, okay? And I bet you there's still people in prison right now in Iran who were arrested from that time. And again, the Iranian people felt abandoned, right? So there is no single Iranian who inside the country, I mean, again, you don't want to categorize everyone, but the majority would not at all trust the policies of the United States. Now that there's a ceasefire, they don't think, oh, because President Trump feels sorry for the Iranian people or want peace and prosperity for their country. No, because for whatever reason, it's beneficial to have a ceasefire right now, and it's beneficial to push whatever agenda that they're pushing. And this is why I underscore that Iranian people are extremely sophisticated and knowledgeable and are aware of history. Right? They know all too well that countries don't have friends, they have interests. also, Courtney, to this point of abandonment, I will say it hurts. It really hurts the average Iranian inside Iran to see that whenever something happens around the world, again, rightfully so, people change their profile pictures, have these hashtags, all eyes on Rafah, stand with Ukraine, stand with Israel, stand with, Afghanistan. I understand that these social media trends and movements fade, but it still matters, right? No one really did that for the Iranian people, and I think they're taking note. They're taking note once again that we're just alone. Um, and so, lastly, if I may, I think so much of that goes back to the reality that the world, whether it be our American viewers and audiences or elsewhere, don't know the Iranian people. They have no idea what their lives are all about. They just know the Iranian regime, and I think that's extremely dangerous because we are missing a huge potential for engagement and discourse. And I think this was once again an indication of why it matters. Why does it matter to know the Iranian people and how to engage with them?
I want to pick up on that point, and thank you for elaborating on this. But before I do, I wanted to go back to what you said about the abandonment, and in particular, I think in very recent history, since the Obama era, we have seen a lot of these uprisings in Iran, like you point out. And I'm curious to get your sense, and I know that counterfactuals are never, I think that they're a limited exercise, right? But I'm curious to get what could have made things different, because obviously there is a very let's say painful history of regime change between the United States and Iran. And so um, I wonder if the United States is willing to only go quite so far, maybe not in rhetoric but in actual actions. um, what could have been done, do you think, to really support the Iranian people when they were speaking out against the regime at all these times and with
Mhm.
such really severe personal consequences?
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, listen, it's only fair and factual to say that the United States has orchestrated coups d'etats and regime changes around the world. I mean, that's just a fact, right? And they did so in Iran in 1953 with their friends, the United Kingdom. They ousted the then elected, the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh because of what? Oil and interest, right? So if they want, they can. And it really comes down to the will and interest of whoever is in charge and whoever is at the helm of policymaking in the US. Now, if we want to talk about right now what can happen, and again, I'm not a policymaker, but what can happen, okay, especially when there are talks of regime change, when the defense minister of Israel so bluntly says, the supreme leader of Iran cannot exist. You know what I mean? I mean, imagine saying that about someone else that you don't like. Imagine if President Trump tomorrow says the president of Venezuela cannot exist. Do you see what I mean? So these rhetorics are out there. So in light of that, what can be a practical approach? If anyone in power is interested to help the Iranian people. I think for the longest time, Iranians have asked for a referendum to elect a secular democracy, and the United Nations has overseen, such elections. So again, I'm not a policymaker, Courtney, but I do wonder. If you can have opportunities where you can have a referendum and an election that's held by that's supported by UN bodies and sort of the sort of global um, constituency. Now, another thing though is that right now, if the United States or anyone is waiting for the Iranian people to come out on the streets, that's not going to happen, Courtney. That is truly not going to happen unless the military sides with the Iranian people, because they've seen over and over, we come on the street, we get killed or arrested, and worse things would happen to you in prison afterward. For what? We are going to stay inside and hold on to this inch of not stability that we have. We're not going to get killed, right? And that's painful. That's painful because the Iranian people deserve so much more than just to survive.
Thank you. I put you in the hot seat there because
Oh.
neither of us are policymakers, but I do think it is an interesting question to think of, particularly for those who are listening, is what can be done in those periods when you do see protests to be more supportive, and supportive in a way that I think goes beyond, kind of social media
Yes, of course.
uh, antics or whatnot.
Trendy trends and Courtney, just to that point, if I may say, and I know we're going to talk about this, but I think so much of this support goes beyond just during the protests, right? Or when things are looking ugly and dirty on the street. I think if the last 30 years, the United States had focused on the people of Iran and find ways of engagement with them through commercial, cultural engagement, I think we would be in a much better position where the hardliners would have not been as emboldened in Iran, and the civil society and the then reformist, moderate voices be choked. And I think that's somewhere that there could have been improvement in the last 3 decades. But right now, unfortunately, you have the hardliners emboldened, and they're the ones who are calling the shots.
Thank you. I think that that's a great point, and that's, I think, a good direction to go in now. So, just kind of picking up on this idea of the Iranian people and something that you said earlier, which is that so many people in the United States know of Iran only through what they see of the government and a lot less of what they see of the people. So just so all listeners know, I actually went to Iran with Network 2020 in 2014. So this is pre-JCPOA. There was just a lot of hope at the time. And again, it was a trip that was sanctioned by the Iranian government. We had a minder. So what we saw may have been somewhat limited, but I still think we were able to push the envelope of what we could see and the kinds of people we could interact with. But one of the senses that I got from most of the people I met is that there's sort of this odd, it's almost like maybe not a cultural affinity, but the values are actually a lot more aligned between Iran and the United States. There's this entrepreneurial spirit, a bit of openness and tolerance, but also this sort of strange religious conservative underbelly, which I know we also have in the United States.
Of course.
So given your understanding of both Iran and the US, I'm curious to get your response to that assertion, and also just your thoughts on what you think Americans should know about the Iranian people.
Thank you for that question, Courtney. Yes, of course. I think no, and I'm going to start with that last point. The Iranian people and the Iranian society are perhaps some of the most pro-American societies in that entire region, and quite frankly in the world. And this goes back to their knowledge of history and the level of education in that country. And I will say categorically, their hopes and dreams and aspirations and fears truly mirror one another. And that's really what I try to encapsulate in my book, The Heartbeat of Iran, which allows our American readers to get a sense of what goes on in an average Iranian person's mind. What is life like for them? What are the challenges? And realize that it is not a monolithic society. Okay. The same way that we don't have a monolithic society in the United States. We have our liberals and conservatives, and then, the ultra religious factions and the opposite. And this is same with Iran. And I think that's missing. And right now, more than ever, I think people look at Iran and think it's a country made up of, whatever, 90 million nuclear heads. And they discount the fact that there are 90 million people living in this country from a host of backgrounds, a host of religious beliefs, a host of social connections and ethnicities and so on, and that's really missing. The fact that an engagement with Iran is actually going to be equally beneficial to those in the United States. This is a country that can have the potential of trillions of dollars in commercial engagement with the region, but also the United States. Courtney, for every single startup and tech that's available in the United States, the equal of that exists in Iran. So we have what? We have our Amazon, Uber, DoorDash, you name it, whatever you can think of that you have on your app. These Iranian kids have created it in Iran under sanctions, okay, as well as socioeconomic restrictions, in the best way that they can. So the talent is there, the education is there. I remember I did a piece when I was with Al Jazeera America in Iran in 2015, and I went to this startup company, and I interviewed, a bunch of these young, tech engineers, and I said, if you could meet anyone in the United States, who would that be? Who's your hero? Who's your tech icon? And this is 2015, and you know what they said? 90% of them said Elon Musk. And so this is a society that wants to belong to the world. It wants to engage, and this is something that I usually can't talk about on sort of TV interviews, because I usually have 3 minutes or 4, or it's short. But Courtney, right now, 2 weeks ago, before the war started, again, despite the categorical repression and corruption of the Islamic regime, okay, that is resented by the majority of Iranians, life was going on. People would go to restaurants, coffee shops, parties. In the streets of Tehran, you have women walk the street without the scarf, without the head, without the hijab. Okay, so people have been pushing their way forward. The society of Iran today is not the same that it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So the Iranian youth, because of their own agency and strength and tenacity, have found a way to move forward. You have gallery openings, you have concerts. Right now, where we're talking, June 25th, Wednesday, right now, as we speak in Tehran, okay, there's a huge concert happening in Azadi Square. The Tehran's orchestra is playing. So life goes on, and we in the West fail to see that life. And if we fail to see that life, we fail to foster engagement. And I think that the President of the United States has the biggest opportunity, and that is to bet on Iran's most valuable asset, and that is its people, because its own government has failed to do that.
Yes, I think it's really interesting. I remember when I was in Iran, I was there at the time of, I think it was sort of like a Tehran Art Open, and the art scene in Iran is phenomenal because, oddly enough, because I think of the censorship, from what I understand, people have had to the artists have become incredibly creative in sort of their technical talent and their expression, and the artwork is just really unbelievable. And like you said, I think artists as well, know how to push the envelope, and life goes on, I think, in a way that is incredibly interesting, and that there is a lot of affinity. And even in the business world, I think that's something that we heard when we were in Iran. I don't know if it holds true. This is a little over 10 years ago, but I don't see why it wouldn't. And that was that Iranians wanted to buy American products, or companies wanted contracts with American companies, because there's sort of that trust built in, and there's the surface, right? It's not like you're buying a product, but you're buying whatever else is behind it, and the support. And that was something that they were really interested in. And they are defaulting to China because that's what's there.
Of course, that's the only thing that's available to them. Yes.
Right, but they
Yes.
really wanted to buy American, and so I think that that is an interesting opportunity. Of course, now we're in this age of tariffs, but that's a whole other conversation. Um, I wanted to just talk a little bit about your book as well, and because I think you chronicle a lot of interesting people in it, and just for listeners who haven't read the book, and it's been some time since I read it, but as I recall, you've profiled people, interviewed people ranging from a top female race car driver to a rabbi to someone who grew up in a very religious family.
Mhm.
Um, would you mind just sharing just a couple of glimpses of some of the people that you profiled? And is there anyone in particular who stands out as sort of emblematic or that feels appropriate to talk about it at this particular moment?
Oh, thank you. Great question. Um, a few come to mind, but briefly on the book, it goes back to the discussion that we've been having, that when we start to know our counterpart, okay, that's when fear and stereotypes are dismantled. And I think we desperately need that between the Iranian people and their American counterparts. We need our American friends in the United States to take a look at Iran through the lens and potential and strength of the people. And I think that's critical. And that's when change and progress truly can happen. I mean, again, I go back to the point I made earlier. I think President Trump right now has an enormous opportunity. That right now there's a ceasefire. There clearly are no talks of regime change. Again, we don't know. Things evolve super fast. But you know what? If the status quo is going to maintain, meaning that the regime is there, there's no change, but there's some sort of engagement, the Iranian people are extremely terrified that a wounded Islamic regime is going to backfire domestically, right? As someone said to me in Iran a few days ago, he said, "Listen, there's nothing more dangerous than an angry lunatic, right? And we are afraid that they're going to take out their humiliation and anger on us." So what was all of this for? And that's why I say, if the president of the United States is interested in some form of talks and engagement in Iran, he should put the people of Iran on the forefront, because that's going to be a win-win for everyone. And on that note, when it comes to my book, I try to encapsulate the diversity of this country and the richness of Iran, because it's in that richness that potential grows. And one story, it's actually the first chapter, and okay, I'll share it, but it's actually, the stories of that of my grandmother. This is a woman who has lived through, the Second World War. She lived through the revolution, the constitutional revolution, then the Islamic revolution. I mean, she's seen so much in her life, and in her final years, she wanted to stay in her home. She didn't want to leave, because it's home, and that sense of belonging. And this is something that we saw amongst so many Iranians this past 12 days, that they rallied around not just the flag in a sense of their government or the regime, but they rallied out around this togetherness, this civil society, that we have each other and we have our own country. And if only we are given, or rather, if we are allowed to take back our own power. Okay, some of Iran's brightest are in prison right now. Journalists, activists, authors, people who can be decision makers in that society. And on top of that, this somber feeling that Iranians have lived with for years. This tragedy of life. Do I go? Do I stay? What do I leave behind? My father and mother would stay here, but I have to go because of my child. And I don't think there's a single Iranian, whether those in my book or those living there, who hasn't felt this. This constant anxiety of what to take with you or what not to take, and whether or not you should leave. That's a reality for people's lives in Iran.
I think that's an excellent point, and one that I think most Americans who have been here since birth have not had to grapple with. But I think a lot of, as a country of immigrants, really built on the backs of immigrants, there's always, in almost every family in the United States, there's someone who's had to wrestle with that decision,
Mhm.
maybe generations back or maybe more recently. But I think it's a very important point to mention.
And if
Um,
I may say something, Courtney, about the book and the stories and the discussion we've been having on the people, is that thoughts and ideas are not in binary. Okay, Iranian people can very well detest their government, but also not agree with the policies and behaviors of, the United States or Israel, and those taking charge in acting in whatever way they're acting. And on top of that, people of Iran can be uh, repressed by the policies of the Islamic regime, but that doesn't mean that the world should define them as victims. Okay, and that's a huge issue, I think, not just, by the way, pertaining to Iran, but elsewhere around the world, is that people who live under repressive regimes actually are more tenacious, creative, as you mentioned, within the art world, but in every single aspect of the Iranian society. And I think every chapter of my book really brings this out. These are extremely tenacious, creative, ambitious, passionate people who actually have something to say and contribute despite everything else, despite this oppressive government that oversees all aspects of their lives. And I think that's, again, an opportunity that, my goodness, there's this vibrant society that has got to this point, and imagine where they can go if only given that opportunity.
Well, I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, as well as really important texture to understanding the people of Iran. I know, for one, I remember years ago just trying to think about, oh, how could we promote more people-to-people dialogue
Yes.
between Americans and Iranians? And you've re-put that thought in my head, because at the time I heard from people that there just really wasn't a space for that. But like you said, it would be wonderful if that space could be opened up again, because I think it would be very worthwhile.
Yes, I do
Anything
agree.
else you think we should know about the current situation, or what's
I
on minds?
I just want to echo that. And I think it's important to engage somehow with people inside Iran, not to wait for people who have fled or have lived experiences in the United States. Of course, those voices are extremely valued, but it's the people inside Iran who are living that life and who are living those experiences. And it is 100% worth our efforts in the United States to find ways of engagement, because it is only through that engagement that understanding would ensue, and therefore empathy. And 10 years from now, if there's another government who wants to drop a bomb somewhere or engage in aggression, um, people would rise because they have that empathy, they have that affinity, they have that connection with the people whose lives are going to be affected. And I think this is a reality and truth that can apply to many other countries, right? I just want to thank you for the opportunity and the work you do. And the last thing I would want to leave our listeners with is that the Iranian society is one of the most pro-American societies in that entire region, and the contribution that they can make, not just to their own country, but the entirety of the Middle East and to the United States, is tremendous, unlike anything that we have seen in the world, really, in the last, I would say, modern history.
Well, thank you, Tara. I really appreciate your taking the time today. I know it's been an exhausting nearly 2 weeks for you, and for friends and family, and for everyone in the region. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I will keep thinking about whether or not there's, whether there are opportunities and where they might be for more direct people to people engagement, because that is something, someone who comes from public diplomacy in the State Department, and looking at what's in the upcoming budget and seeing that public diplomacy and people to people exchanges are something that might not survive through funding. I think it will be imperative for other, whether it's people,
Avenues.
private philanthropy, foundations, to find a way to support that kind of engagement. So thank you,
Thank you,
Tara.
Courtney. Thank you.